What do you picture when you think about the end of the world? Probably chaos, right? Explosions, riots, the whole disaster movie package. We've been trained to see collapse as a loud, violent event, a bloody exclamation point at the end of a civilization story. But history shows us something else, something quieter and, frankly, a lot more chilling. It turns out the final moments before a society implodes aren't always noisy. In fact, they're often marked by a profound, unnerving quiet, a silence where progress just stops, where warnings are ignored and an entire civilization seems to hold its breath right before it disappears. This isn't the good kind of quiet. This isn't peace. It's the silence of paralysis. It's the sound of a system that has lost the ability to solve its own problems. The hum of daily life continues, but the grand projects, the bold ideas, the very pulse of a people, flatlines. This silence is the most terrifying part of collapse, because it's not an enemy at the gates. It's a sickness that has already rotted the system from the inside out. The chaos and the explosions? That's just the aftermath. That's the sound of the structure finally giving way. The real danger is the eerie calm that comes first, the period when a civilization still looks strong, still feels permanent, but has quietly forgotten how to save itself. This is the story of that silence. We're going to look at majestic ruins left by civilizations that fell not with a bang, but with a whisper. We'll dig through archaeological layers that show a slow, creeping stillness right before the final catastrophe. And we'll ask the most important question. What does this pattern from the past teach us about today? Are we, right now, mistaking silence for stability? Before we go back in time, we have to understand why this idea is so damn disturbing. Our brains are wired to associate silence with peace. It's a relief. But in a crisis, that flips. Silence becomes a threat, an absence of information that our minds rush to fill with worst-case scenarios. It's a vacuum of dread. When the authorities stop communicating, when the grand promises of a better future dry up, when culture pivots from creating meaningful art to just pumping out escapism, an unnerving stillness takes over. This isn't just a lack of noise. It's a very specific kind of quiet, the silence of institutional paralysis. It's what happens when a society's problems get so tangled and so deep that the people who are supposed to fix them just stop trying. They might still go through the motions of power, issue decrees, and hold ceremonies, but the real problem-solving energy is gone. The system has all the appearance of function, but it has lost the ability to turn decisions into results. It's also a social silence, the silence of collective denial. When the challenges we face are just too scary to think about, an unspoken agreement can spread through a society. We just won't talk about it. Life goes on. Today feels like yesterday. People go to work, raise families, watch their shows, but the foundations of their world could be cracking right under their feet, and the silence is just a group coping mechanism. It's a way to pretend things are normal for just a little while longer. The danger is that the crisis just builds up internally, with no release, until it can't be contained anymore. It's the quiet withdrawal right before the snap. This suspended animation, where everyone feels the tension, but no one dares to name it, is the perfect breeding ground for collapse. The system doesn't break from a single heavy blow. It crumbles because during that critical period of silence, it lost the will to even try to hold itself together. The problem isn't the storm. It's the strange, suffocating calm before it, when the birds stop singing and the whole world seems to hold its breath. To really get this, we have to look at the ghosts of civilizations past and see how this played out, time and time again. Our first stop is over 3,000 years ago, at the end of the Late Bronze Age, around 1200 BC. In many ways, this was a surprisingly modern world. It was a globalized network of powerful, interconnected empires, stretching from Greece to Egypt. The Mycenaeans, the Hittites, the New Kingdom of Egypt, and the city-states of the Levant. These weren't isolated kingdoms. They were members of a club of great powers, all linked by trade and diplomacy. Their world ran on bronze, which meant they needed a huge international supply chain. Copper came from Cyprus, but tin, much rarer, had to be imported from as far away as Afghanistan. This whole system fueled a golden age. They built massive palaces, art flourished, and scribes kept meticulous records of everything. The world was a complex humming machine. And then, the machine quietly started to seize up. The final collapse was fast and brutal. In about a century, from roughly 1250 to 1150 BC, major cities were burned to the ground, entire civilizations vanished, trade routes were cut, and writing systems disappeared. The chaos of the final destruction, the fires and the invasions by the mysterious sea peoples, is what gets all the attention. But the real story is the silence that came before. Archaeologists have found a disturbing pattern in the decades leading up to the end. The evidence doesn't point to a sudden shock, but to a system already suffering from a creeping paralysis. Look at the buildings. For centuries, these civilizations built giant temples and towering palaces. But as the 13th century BC wore on, that monumental construction just slows down. In some places, it stops completely. It's as if the confidence, the ambition to build for eternity, just evaporated. The written record is even more chilling. Writing systems like the Mycenaean Linear B weren't for poetry. They were for bureaucracy, tracking taxes, trade, and supplies. They were the records of a functioning economy. As the collapse got closer, the last of these records get frantic, obsessed with weapon inventories and coastal defense, and then they just stop. After the collapse, the very knowledge of writing vanished from Greece for centuries. This wasn't just a political shift, it was a societal decapitation. The tiny literate elite who ran the whole show were wiped out, and their knowledge died with them. Even the trade routes, the arteries of this civilization, show signs of a blockage before the final heart attack. The intricate web of connections that defined the Bronze Age was fraying long before the final burn. The system was getting brittle, losing its ability to bounce back. We even have one of the last messages from the end of this world. A final desperate letter from the king of Ugarit. A major port city was found in a kiln, baked hard by the very fire that destroyed his city. In it, he's pleading with the king of Cyprus, talking about enemy ships on the coast and a famine ravaging his land. He says his own troops are stationed too far away to help. It's a message in a bottle from a world on fire. It speaks to a system that had become so overstretched and interdependent that when multiple crises hit at once, drought, famine, rebellions, raiders, it simply couldn't cope. The leaders knew the threats were there, but the machine of the state had grown too rigid to respond. The late Bronze Age collapse is a brutal lesson in systemic failure. The silence wasn't an absence of problems. It was an absence of solutions. It was the quiet of a globalized system that had become too complex and too rigid to adapt. The great kings were still on their thrones, the palaces still stood, but the lifeblood of their world was draining away. The final invasions weren't the cause of the collapse. They were just the vultures that cleaned up a world that was already dying in the quiet. Next, we cross the Atlantic into the jungles of Mesoamerica, to the world of the classic Maya. From around 250 to 900 AD, the Maya built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the ancient world. They weren't one big empire, but a network of powerful city-states like Tikal, Calakmul, and Copan that were constantly competing and allying with each other. Their achievements were staggering. They developed the most advanced writing system in the Americas, created an incredibly accurate calendar, and built massive stone cities that towered over the jungle. The center of Maya public life was the stela. These were tall, carved stone monuments set up in the main plazas. They were more than just art. They were the official voice of the state. On them, the divine kings recorded their victories, their family trees, and important cosmic rituals. Every new stela was a declaration of power and continuity, a promise that the king was keeping the universe in balance. The regular construction of these monuments was the pulse of the civilization, carved in stone. And then, in the late 8th century, that pulse started to fade. The classic Maya collapse wasn't a single event. but a slow-motion catastrophe that rolled across the region for over a century. And its most telling symptom was the creeping silence of the stones. Archaeologists have tracked this cultural paralysis with incredible precision. Starting around 790 AD, cities just stopped putting up dated monuments. The practice of carving calendar dates, the very signature of Maya civilization, started to vanish. Over the next few decades, this silence spread. The number of new monuments being built fell off a cliff. The last known calendar date from the southern lowlands is from the year 889. After that, the public voice of the kings goes silent. Forever. This is the archaeological signature of the Maya collapse. It signals a complete political and ideological failure. The divine kings, whose entire job was to talk to the gods and keep everyone prosperous, were clearly failing. A nasty cocktail of constant warfare, environmental damage from deforestation, and severe, prolonged droughts put the whole system under unbearable stress. When the rains failed, which we know they did repeatedly, the agricultural system collapsed, and so did the authority of the rulers who claimed to control it. What's so stunning is how this failure shows up as silence. The kings stopped talking. They stopped making grand public pronouncements of their power because that power is gone. It's a slow, quiet admission of defeat. Imagine living in one of those cities. For generations, your life was marked by the regular appearance of these incredible monuments. It was proof that your king and your city were strong. Then one cycle ends, and no new stone is raised. Then another. The silence in that plaza would have been deafening, an unspoken announcement that the deal between the rulers and the ruled was broken. The end wasn't immediate. In some places, people tried to hold on. At one city, Dos Pilas, the desperate population tore down their own beautiful temples to build defensive walls, a frantic last stand. But the ideology that held their world together had already died. The silence of the monuments was the silence of a system that had lost its story. People didn't wait for the cities to be destroyed. They just walked away from the monuments of a failed system and melted back into the jungle, leaving behind a world swallowed by a profound and permanent quiet. For our last trip, we're going to the most famous collapse of all, the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The name alone brings up images of barbarian hordes, the sack of Rome in 410 AD, and the violent end of a world. And yeah, those things happened. But the fall of Rome wasn't one event. It was a long and complex spiral of decline. The final death of the empire was loud and messy, but the disease that killed it had taken hold centuries earlier. And its main symptom was a deep structural silence, a silence of institutional response and elite abandonment. By the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, Rome was facing a cascade of crises. The government, which was once a source of stability, had become corrupt and predatory. Crushing taxes to pay for a bloated military and bureaucracy, combined with the constant debasement of currency, fueled runaway inflation. The very machinery of the state was grinding to a halt, becoming better at stopping things than at getting anything done. This was the silence of institutional decay. On the surface, the empire still looked like Rome. It had its legions, its governors, its laws, and its incredible roads. But it was being hollowed out from the inside. There was a growing gap between the formal power of the state and its actual ability to solve problems. This paralysis was clearest in the actions of the Roman elite. As the state became more broken and unreliable, the ruling class started to quietly check out. They began to see their own survival as separate from the survival of the empire. Their loyalty shifted from the public good to the private preservation of their own wealth. The story of a Roman official named Rutilius Nematianus is a perfect example. In the early 5th century, as things were getting really bad, he wrote a poem about his sad departure from Rome. But he wasn't just leaving, he was fleeing. He was a rich, powerful man abandoning his post, likely taking his gold and private bodyguards to go carve out his own personal kingdom in Gaul. He wasn't alone. Even the Emperor Honorius had ditched Rome for the safer, swamp-protected city of Ravenna. When the Visigoths finally sacked Rome in 410, the emperor famously did nothing. This was the silence of the elites. While the empire crumbled, they scrambled to save themselves, often while publicly denying there was even a crisis. They retreated to their massive, fortified country estates, which were basically becoming self-sufficient little kingdoms. They stopped investing in the cities and public projects. Many just packed up and moved to the more stable Eastern Empire, taking their money with them. It was a massive vote of no confidence in the future of the West. Their silence wasn't just a failure to lead. It was a physical and economic withdrawal from the project of Rome. For the average person, this was a catastrophe. Long-distance trade, once protected by the Roman military, collapsed. Life became radically simplified. Specialized jobs vanished. The complex, interconnected economy disappeared, and people were forced back to subsistence farming. Cities shrank dramatically. It was a catastrophic decline in the quality of life for millions. The fall of Rome teaches us that the most dangerous silence is that of a ruling class that has given up. It's the quiet that falls when the social contract breaks, not with a riot, but with the private, subtle decisions of the powerful to just opt out. The barbarians didn't destroy a thriving civilization. They walked into a vacuum. They pushed over a structure that was already rotten to the core, a structure that had fallen silent long before it finally fell down. We've walked through the ruins of the Bronze Age, the jungles of the Maya, and the forums of Rome. These stories aren't just history lessons, they're mirrors, and the reflection is uncomfortable. Because the pattern of pre-collapse silence, institutional paralysis, elite withdrawal, and social denial is disturbingly visible in our own world. Think about the silence of our institutions. All around us, we see systems that seem to grow more complex and expensive, yet less effective. Trust in government and other major institutions is at historic lows, which breeds a zero-sum mindset that makes real progress almost impossible. Political gridlock turns even basic governance into a crisis. We have a governance system in decline, one that, increasingly, struggles to perform even its most basic tasks. This is the modern version of Roman institutional decay, a system that looks powerful on the outside, but has lost its ability to act decisively for the common good. At the same time, we're seeing the quiet withdrawal of a globalized elite. Just like Roman nobles retreated to their fortified villas, some of today's ultra-wealthy are increasingly investing in private security, remote compounds, and self-contained lifestyles. They're buying bunkers in New Zealand, investing in private security, and creating economic bubbles that shield them from the consequences of a fraying social fabric. This is an elite that is, in many ways, losing its allegiance to the nations that made them rich. Their wealth is global, their identities are transnational, and their primary loyalty is often to their own class, not to the citizens they're leaving behind. This quiet detachment is the sound of the social contract being shredded, not in a noisy revolution, but in the quiet hum of a private jet. And then there's the deepest silence of all, our own. We live in an age of constant information, but we are also constantly distracted. Modern life trains us to be obsessed with notifications, headlines, and the opinions of others. This creates a weird paradox. We're always thinking about ourselves, but we're losing touch with our own inner authority. Faced with overwhelming challenges like climate change, economic instability, and social fragmentation, the temptation is to just retreat into distraction. It's easier to binge a show or get into a pointless online argument than it is to confront the scale of the problems we face. This is the silence of social denial. We feel the instability. We see the warning signs, the supply chain glitches, the weird weather, the political dysfunction. But we participate in an unspoken agreement not to really talk about it. We treat systemic problems like isolated incidents, easy to dismiss. We're losing the shared language needed to even discuss our biggest threats, let alone solve them. This social silence leaves us isolated and vulnerable, holding our breath as the pressure builds. The historical pattern is clear. Collapse doesn't start with chaos. It starts when a society loses its ability to respond to challenges. It starts when institutions freeze, when elites abandon the common good, and when the public retreats into denial. The constant noise of our daily lives can easily mask this deeper silence. We might be living in the loudest, most connected civilization in history. But if you listen closely, underneath all that noise, you can hear a profound and familiar quiet spreading. It's the silence of a system holding its breath. And history warns us that this is the scariest sound of all. The stories of the past are not prophecies. They are cautionary tales. The pattern of the pre-collapse silence doesn't mean we're doomed, but it does mean we have to start listening. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. A civilization can look amazing on the surface, gleaming cities, booming markets, even while its foundations are silently rotting away. The Bronze Age kings, the Maya lords, and the Roman senators weren't idiots. They were smart, capable people, but they were trapped inside the logic of their own systems, unable to see or act beyond the world they inherited. Their failure was a failure of adaptation. They presided over a hollow peace that was just the prelude to ruin. Understanding this pattern is both a burden and a powerful tool. It forces us to look past the daily noise and listen for the silences. Where are the conversations that aren't happening? Which massive problems are being met with paralysis instead of action? Who is quietly checking out of the social contract? Acknowledging this silence is the first, most critical step to breaking it. The end is not written. Unlike the people of the past, we have their memory. We have the archaeological records. We can see the pattern. The only question is whether we'll choose to pay attention. The real lesson from all this isn't that societies are fragile. It's that they are only resilient when they are willing to confront their problems honestly and together. Resilience isn't silence. It's conversation, it's argument. It's the noisy, difficult, essential work of facing a shared threat and finding a shared response. The alternative is to let the quiet spread, to mistake a lack of chaos for stability, and to one day find ourselves standing in the rubble, wondering why we never heard the warnings that were all around us. If this dive into history's hidden patterns made you think, please consider subscribing and liking the video. More importantly, I want to hear from you in the comments. Where do you see this modern silence in the world, and what gives you hope that we can break it? History warns us that collapse begins when societies stop talking honestly about their problems. Maybe the antidote isn't silence, maybe it's conversation. Let's start it now. So I want to hear from you. Where do you see this silence today, and what gives you hope we can break it? Thanks for watching. Stay safe and stay informed.